Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Return to the Realm, a rereaders podcast for the Realm of the Elderlings series by Rob and Hobb. I'm Kayiu, joined by Alex and Leah, and on today's episode, we're going to cover chapters 15 through 19 or 20, depending on how timing goes, of Assassin's Apprentice. And we're now officially more than halfway through the book. We're getting towards the tail end, but things are not getting better for Fitz. Um, and
They never will.
they never will. But yeah, so the first low point is in chapter 15, the Witness Stones, which is also probably my favorite and least favorite chapter in the book combined. So in this chapter, the skill training with Galen continues, um, and Fitz rapidly improves and is confident until, uh, with one essentially mistake, he gives Galen an opening, and Galen essentially uses a depression beam on him and uh, imposes a skill command on Fitz to die. Fitz essentially loses all faith in himself, is beaten, tries to commit suicide, and when Burge finds him in this state,
He's beaten almost to death.
oh yeah, like
Yeah.
there's a part where Burge is like
Almost
presses
Burge said if it was like a little bit over, he would have been a goner.
yeah, he presses his forehead and he's like, "This is how close you came to losing an eye." It's crazy. But yeah, I think this is probably a good point
Okay,
to talk
continue.
about.
Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, that was all I had to say. But like pre-episode,
Okay.
we were talking about like Galen's skill teaching methods and how that compares to like what we hear from other people. So I think we can kind of just continue on that, which was, I guess the quick recap is we're thinking that where does Galen's austerity come from? Because it doesn't feel like something that he was taught by Felicity, and Verity notes it as something weird.
I think he just hates himself and he hates everybody else. And like, I think it's almost a weird, like, bus drivers that hate kids. And they're just like really mean to kids. It's like Galen hates everybody and he's jealous of anyone stronger in the skill than him. And he's threatened by anyone like that. So then he feels like if he brings new students on, he doesn't want to teach anybody in the first place, and then when he has to, he's like, I'm going to teach them, but also torture them for my own pleasure.
And what you said about like him not wanting,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay,
Because I was gonna go on something a little bit different.
okay. Later on, there's this thing about like Verity is talking about like the function of a coterie and how it's supposed to be like a pooling of power for like one person, and like
And yeah, like a hive mind.
yeah, and like Verity is like, it's kind of not working out for me though. They kind of just feel like they're not working together, and I feel like it's kind of because Galen wants to use them for himself as the principal almost, which is also why he's scared of people being stronger in the skill, because he's like, no, I will always be the leader.
Well, and it's because he chose all of those people
Mhm.
to be in the coterie, and they are supposed to choose themselves, I think. They all are supposed to willingly come together and be like, we would be stronger together, but he just threw them together and was like, this will work.
Mhm.
And I think that's
Also,
why.
actively sets them against each other. Like they're supposed to be a team and work together and support each other. And the whole training is founded on like, don't get here
Who's
last.
better than who?
Yeah, like they're constantly in competition and then they're not allowed to talk to each other. They're not allowed to form relationships. They're not allowed to like be friends or experience anything positive together. So they're like at odds with each other constantly, and that's the opposite of what a team should be.
Mhm.
Or should be built on, too. You're not building a strong team if everybody is looking over their shoulder to see if somebody's doing better than them and they have to one up them.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Galen, I can't remember what we were talking about, but it's something about, like Galen's self-loathing and stuff. I think there's also something about him where, like, anything in the physical world is, like, dirty and, like, unclean because he doesn't even like eating. Like, he can only tolerate plain food. So, like, I think he's, like, one of those people. It starts with an O or something. At least for like the eating, there's like an eating disorder section
Hmm.
where like they slowly start cutting out everything because they think it's unhealthy. So that might be something that Galen has, but I think it's like the whole physical body because he like has to deprive everybody of everything because I think he thinks that like all of that's wrong and you can't connect to the skill if you enjoy some things in the physical world.
I wonder if it has anything to do with his
Yeah.
mother too, because like Desire was the exact opposite, right? She was like the
Yeah,
drugs all the
Indulgent.
time, and it like pleasures of the
and they killed
physical.
her.
Yeah, so I wonder if like Galen took that super hard and is like never gonna go down that path.
Yeah, that could definitely be it. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, but whatever the reasons, Galen is a shitty person to these poor kids.
Yeah. Time.
Yes.
Hates Fitz. He hates women. He hates everybody. Like, he's just not good at all. And it's funny how he's so mean to Serene, and then Serene becomes like his little dog.
Most loyal follower.
Mhm.
Mm. He's
It's
like
like
obsessed
Stockholm
with him.
syndrome, honestly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, this is I think something I meant to mention last time, but I didn't get to. It's like one thing that I kind of don't like about this trilogy specifically is I feel like both of the villains, Galen and Regal, are kind of like Regal has more depth, but I feel like Galen is just kind of like caricature-ish. It's like he hates women,
Mhm.
he hates animals, he'll kick a puppy for the hell of it. It's just like almost like over the top, like you are supposed to hate this person, and like I don't think like I think I would be fine with all of those negative elements existing if there were more time was devoted to exploring kind of who he is, but then he
Yeah.
just kind of like dies, and it's like, oh, he sucked, and that's good vindication, I guess, but also like, damn.
And we don't see him very much in the beginning. So like he's not introduced as a character until I think halfway through the book almost.
Mhm.
So we don't
Mhm.
really get to see him developed as a person before we see him as a villain.
It would be really interesting if like Fitz just catches glimpses of him at different times because there's so
Or
many
like
like little
accidentally runs into him.
yeah.
Or hears like Burrich complaining about the way he like treated one of the horses or something.
Mhm.
I think he. Well, it might be Regal. There, one of them. Birch does complain about one of them and the way they like
Yeah.
bruise the horse's mouth a
Yeah, he
bit.
did that, but I think that's only like a chapter before we actually meet
Like
Galen himself.
one little thing.
Yeah, I think because
Mhm.
it's basically like I think it's in the chapter where it's like Chade is like, "Tell me everything you know about Galen Fitz. Exposition for me."
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
where.
And he's like, and Galen and Rico look alike.
And Shade's like, really?
Mhm,
I wonder why.
mhm,
Tell me more.
The only like glimpse we really get into Galen and why Galen is the way he is, at least towards Fitz, is when Fitz Galen's kind of in his head rifling through everything, and then Fitz pushes back and actually gets into Galen's head, and
It
there's
is
like
a little bit, yeah.
yeah, there's a line where I had it in my notes. Says, I knew that at some former time he had struggled like this with someone he despised. And you find out later on that that's chivalry. So he like hated chivalry probably out of jealousy, because this is like the actual like legitimate prince, and you're just the bastard of the queen. And
The
then
second queen, nonetheless.
right, the second queen, and then he imposes this skill command of like love me, so then that hatred just gets buried down, and then once chivalry dies, it's kind of like transposed onto Fitz. Probably hates him for also being a bastard. Then that like
And be
leftover.
stronger in the skill.
Yeah, and that leftover hatred that he felt toward chivalry kind of like put onto his son, and then his son ends up doing like this almost the same thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also, okay, before the whole, I guess, like, climax point of this chapter, there's something that made me really sad is when, like, the fool comes in and is like, "Hey, dog, Galen's not gonna let you succeed. You need to do something." And Fitz, on one hand, I get it because, like, he's never seen himself seeing himself as having the potential to do anything worthwhile, so he's like, "I'm doing great at the skill, I love it." But he just, like, dismisses the fool, and he's like, "If you cannot speak clearly, why do you speak at all?" And then the line that
I
really
know, that
broke
was
me
so
is
freaking
like,
rude.
Fitz is like, "Fool," I began. "Yes, I am that," he said and left, and I'm like, "Ah, why are you such a dick, Fitz?"
And that happens so many times throughout the, like, series when Fitz will call him the fool, and then he's like, "Yeah, that's me." Or, like, in Tawny Man, when I love it when the fool says something like, um, "I will call you beloved, and you'll call me the fool."
Mhm.
And I was just like, "Oh, I love that."
Now that you, like, frame it like that, that reminds me of something, like, later on in this section when Fitz comes back from Galen's test and goes to meet Birch in the infirmary. Um, Birch is like, "That bastard gave everyone else horses," and then Fitz is like, "No, remember, I'm the bastard."
That's me.
Yeah.
Yes. I didn't even think about it like that. I didn't make that connection.
Mhm. Big parallels.
Mhm.
All the time.
Mhm.
Always.
But yeah, so the big climax of this chapter, it's it's so, like, heartbreaking and but, like, also so beautiful how, like, the description of, like, Smithy as this tiny light inside of Fitz that grows louder and won't let him, like, destroy himself, and then just they loved me in spite of myself. It's such, like, a beautiful description of unconditional love in general, and it's just, like, it's
Mhm.
a really awesome scene, despite how awful everything else is. Um, and it makes me so sad because, like, Smithy I feel like Smithy is kinda like the most tragic out of all of Fitz's wit companions, because with Nosy,
Yeah.
at least Nosy got to live, like, a full life, outside of being with Fitz. Same with,
Yeah.
Night Eyes, but Smithy loves Fitz so much just by not getting to spend that much time with him and eventually dies before his prime. And it's just like, man.
Yeah, and he doesn't even get to explore anything, like, he stays in Fitz's
Fence.
room for a long time, like, I'm sure he's not even a year old, or if he is, he's, like, only a year, like, he's still a little baby,
Mhm. Yeah, then, like,
and he
His
would do anything for his boy.
yeah, and, like, it
whole
hurts
life to
so much because,
yeah.
like, like, when Fitz is leaving after, because this is when he leaves for the Galen's test, it's right after the skill training, so he hasn't had that much time with Smithy at all, and he's like, "I'll give several days for his sole benefit and a long hunt such as we never had time for before." He says that, like, right before he leaves, and Smithy dies while he's gone. It's like, they'll never get to do that
You know,
hunt.
breaks my
Smithy's
frickin'
like
heart.
he thinks that he's like, how about now? And Fitz is like, not right now. We'll go when I get back. And it's like,
Later.
Like,
no.
mhm.
Yeah, I think reading this book is hard because you do like Smithy, but then he goes away so soon. And then we don't get any relief, like, we don't get Night Eyes until the next book.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like Fitz alone again.
I I it was hilarious, but also, like, so tragic because, like I mentioned, one of my friends just read this book, and then they were like, "I can't believe they killed the dog when Nosy died," and then Smithy comes along, and then, she was like, "Okay, they
Oh
better not
god.
kill another dog," and then it's like, "I can't believe they killed another dog," and then Nosy comes back, and it's like, "See, they only killed one dog," and you get to the epilogue, and it's like,
It's not
"Psych,
that bad.
psych,"
Half the dogs lived.
and it's like, "Psych, never mind, they both still died," and it's like, oh.
Yeah.
It had to warn my mom read this book and she was like about to abandon it because of what Burge does to Nosy, and I had to be like, he's not dead.
Yet.
I'm sorry to spoil, but like if you're literally gonna stop reading it because you think that Burge killed a dog, like I'll just tell you that
Birch would never.
Burge would never. Just keep reading and saying nothing else. I won't tell you that another dog dies later. And
Right.
Yeah, I know that there. I wasn't aware of this until recently, but I think there's like a good number of people who like have really bad experiences with like animal death in like media, and so there's like lots of like there's like does the dog die for like movies and stuff. So
I am
Oh,
yeah, this is
dang.
like the worst
like
book for people who have like that kind of I don't know, not phobia, but that kind of trauma, I suppose.
I
Yeah.
am like that, like 100%. I will look up before I watch a movie, does the dog die? And if the dog dies, I won't watch it. Um, Midnight Mass has a dog death. That's like a really popular show right now. I had to look up prior the timestamp so that I
Which
could find
episode?
it.
Oh, dang.
I had to.
Okay.
I'm like
That's smart,
super
though.
sensitive about that stuff. Um, that's why, like, when I'm recommending this book, I'll tell people like, dog
Don't get too
dies,
attached.
but it's handled in like a sensitive way. Like, if I can handle it, then like it's okay.
Mhm.
You know?
And I think because Hobb is such an animal lover herself, like she could never do something so cruel to us and have it be like this horrible thing,
Right. Right.
even though it
Yeah.
kind of is very, very sad.
Yeah, it's like a trade-off of like because of the Fitz's wit, you get like this much more empathetic reading of how about like how these animals like how that process happens and the grieving for the animals. But it's also it hurts so much more because you get that increased thing of like, oh, they're actual.
Yeah. They're like our friends.
Mhm,
We have a connection with them.
mhm.
I
They're
think
little
like the
people.
thing that makes it more tolerable for me too is that it doesn't feel unnecessary. Like I think so
Yeah.
often in media it's like, and then the dog died,
It's like
you
we
know,
are
for no
establishing
reason.
Yeah.
stakes, and it's like no, that's not what
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
And this is like it's an emotional connection, and like Smithy's death is what drives Fitz to like survive. You know,
And Smithy's death saves Burrich's life.
Mhm.
right,
Like,
if that doesn't happen, Fitz might get eaten by a bunch of Forge ones because he doesn't have that like
because
drive.
he's waiting for Galen.
Mhm.
Right.
Oh, yeah. He would have let the Red Ship Raiders take him or something for sure. Not
Right.
like on purpose, but it definitely would have been like
Oh no,
he ran into them
no.
and like
Galen would
didn't
have
know what to
definitely
do.
been like, ah, yes, a convenient excuse.
You know what? What if Galen like told the like Skill told the Red Ship Raiders to come and be there, or like he knew that they were gonna
Yeah,
be there that night,
Because
and
they
he
that's
had
why
were
that
he
in his
chose
doing
it
oh
to
yeah,
drop
because they
them
were
off.
doing like skill scroll exchanges potentially at this point. Oh,
I literally had that in my notes. I was like, how in bed were Regal and Galen with the Pale Woman? Like, is there a chance that they put Fitz at that location because they knew a red ship was coming? Or that they told a red ship to go there because they put Fitz at that location?
that's
Mhm.
terrifyingly possible. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so to the post Fitz injury, almost dying scene. The tender way that like Burge is like talking to Fitz in this scene like breaks my heart. It's like Burge spoke carefully, speaking the truth for an idiot. And it's just like Fitz. And I love the way he's like kind of like trying not to he treats him like an animal the way he's like trying not to startle him, like speaking
Yeah.
calmly, and it's just like, "Hey, so what's up? What happened?" And it's just
The only time
oh, sorry, go
Birch is nice. I was gonna say the only time Birch is nice to Fitz is when he's like sick or injured.
On his deathbed,
like on
yeah.
imminent like at the end of the book he's like, "Fitz, I guess we have our issues, but it looks like we're all gonna die, so you know what? You're still my boy."
There's a little
And that
clue chapter that Burrich is witted, he says, like, it says he's gonna send to the Hawks or something. And Burrich is like, you can't, for the Hawks don't like you. You're too warm and you don't mind your own business enough.
Yeah, I love that he does that. He knows all of his animals so well, and he's got, like, such a relationship with them, even if it is, like, mostly, like, trying to his best to stay unwitted, like, it seeps into his life. There's
He
no way
knows.
he could not.
It's funny that Fitz it doesn't occur to him to be like, how would Burrich know that the Hawks think I'm too warm?
Mhm.
The only way he would know that for sure is if he's witted.
And, like, how would Birch know that Fitz is using the wit if Birch didn't have the wit himself to, like, sense it?
Mhm.
Can tell when he's questing out. Normal people
Yeah,
can't.
I think Fitz just kind of like,
except maybe Molly.
yeah,
Yeah. I think Fitz just thinks that everybody's like that, so it doesn't occur to him that, like, oh, Burrich has this
It's
thing.
not
So,
an unwitted thing.
yeah.
yeah. Like his thing is like, if he was witted, why does he not simply bond with an animal? Like, but then, yeah. Uh, I think a really interesting like narrative choice here is it really easily Hobb could have like cut to Burrich like dragging Galen out and beating his ass. Like really could have just done that end of the chapter. But I think this thing of like giving Fitz this time to convalesce and like we're not sure what's going on that front. Why is Burrich happy? But we get to see Fitz like slowly come back to himself in some manner of speaking, both physically and mentally. Um, and then you get that bombshell is I think really increases the impact of it. Also,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
Mhm. Um, the line, "You look at me sometimes with my lord's eyes." Oh, that hurts me so much. And it also, I'm gonna add that as one more thing to potential Birch of gay. Just like
Oh, yeah.
just like the that like deep sorrow that he notices there. I'm just like,
Yes.
Mhm.
hmm,
Yeah, there's no doubt. I feel like they definitely had a little thing.
hmm."
They had to, because they were so close, and I just want it to happen, so
Pretty much.
it is.
Um,
Speaking of when Burrich beats the shit out of Galen, which is like the best thing ever, I want so badly to know what Burrich whispered to him after beating him up. Like, I feel like the fool knows he's not saying.
100% he knows.
the
It's
fool's
like
just a
one
good
of,
storyteller, knows how to keep it tantalizing.
He's
yeah, it's
like,
like one
"I wasn't there, but I heard
Mhm.
this is what went down."
Oh,
it, it's one of those things in these books that like you never get an answer to, or at least not one that I remember. But it's like, oh, I want to know. Like, if I could ask Robin Hobb one thing, it might be this. Like, what does Burrich whisper to Galen? Because she wouldn't put that sentence in there if it wasn't like note.
and I think like we can like assume the gist of it, of like,
Oh, definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's like, "You better stay away from my son or I'll kill your ass.
pretty much.
Best watch
Like,
out."
mhm. God, and that whole thing with the fool at the end. Okay, I'm gonna look up the exact line, so forgive me, people watching this on video, as my like camera goes off as I look up stuff on my phone. Um, oh, whoops. Uh, but like, there's would you like? There's a line where it's like, "Would you go back to your lessons if I asked this of you, as a friend?" And it's like the way he said it is like he said it carefully, as though the mere saying of it was like it was something fragile. Uh, where is it? I'm trying to find the exact line. The word sounded so odd from his lips. He spoke it without mockery, carefully, as if the saying of it aloud could shatter the meaning. And it's just like that's kind of, I think, the first time that we get like a sense of how close the fool and Fitz have become in this moment. Like before they're kind of just acquaintances, but kind of like going through this experience, they've become closer. Also, just like
And
okay, sorry, go ahead.
I bet the fool hasn't had a friend before,
Like ever.
ever. So, like,
I was
this is
just gonna
something so new to him, and he's like, "Should I say this? Like, are we friends?" Maybe he doesn't even know what it is yet, and oh, he
I
was
think
so
he wants to be
little.
friends too. It's like when you're a kid and you like want to be friends with someone, but you're afraid to
But
call
you
them
don't know if they wanna
friends.
be friends with you yet? Yeah,
Yeah. Yep. So you're like treading
that's
on
definitely
thin,
it.
thin ice. Like, do I call them my friend yet? I really want them to be.
Mhm. Also, while it's definitely like like a definitely a different dynamic, one thing that like it reminded me of is like um this might be weird, but like how like Dumbledore and Harry and Harry Potter like because there's this thing where Dumbledore is like, yeah, I initially got close to you because I had to like protect you and I knew this prophecy about you, but as I grew to know you, I became attached. And I feel like there's a similar thing going on here where at first the fool is just out there is like, yeah, you're my catalyst. You make stuff happen. But then as
Yeah, I've gotta keep you alive.
mhm, but like the personal starts coming in more and more as they get to know each other. And it's just like, ah.
Yeah,
Um
But I like the fool a
and I
lot better
wonder
than Dumbledore.
yeah, yeah, because I feel like the fool handles things better, and I think that I wonder if the fool really started to grow attached to Fitz through his, like, prophetic dreams. Like, do you think he saw all these horrible things happening to Fitz and he was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I feel so bad for you"? Or he started to know Fitz when he was giving him the prophecies or the warnings, and then he was started, like, forming the connection then?
I think it's like
I think a little of both.
yeah, I think part of it just like Fitz knows what it's like to be a kind of like the black sheep of the family or like and just like to have people like
Of
take
the
note
castle.
yeah, the castle of people taking note of you. And I feel like he kind of like after he realizes the fool isn't stupid, I think that kind of like puts on a switch of like, oh, we're kind of similar. People assume that we're stupid. They don't like talking to us, and they kind of like, and so at that point he starts affording fool kind of like talking to him as an equal, which is something that like basically no one else other than Shrewd does.
I think since we're talking about the fool so much, we can jump forward quite a bit to when Fitz goes and tries to find the fool in his room,
Mm.
because I feel like
Oh
I have a lot
god.
to say about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that fine? Can we jump a little bit?
I just wanna before we move, I wanna just, like, read that whole, like, story that the fool tells just because, like, I love that. It
Yes.
is
Yeah.
my favorite moment in this entire book. Um, yeah, and this is I think this and the patient scene are 2 things that make me cry every time I read them. No matter what circumstances, I'll let out at least a little tear. "I don't know why he bothers with you," the fool agreed. The familiar cynicism was back. "Galen? He has to, the king. Burrage. He just likes bossing me about," I complained. And it sounded childish, even to me. The fool shook his head. "You haven't even a clue, have you?" "About what?" "About how the stablemaster dragged Galen from his bed, and from thence to the witness stones. I wasn't there, of course, or I would be able to tell you how Galen cursed and struck at him. But the stablemaster paid no attention. He just hunched his shoulders to the man's blows and kept silent. He gripped the skillmaster by the collar so the man was fair choked and dragged him along. And the soldiers and guards and the stable boys followed in a stream that became a torrent of men. If I had been there, I could tell you how no man dared to interfere, for it was as if the stablemaster had become as Birch once was, an iron-muscled man with a black temper that was like a madness when it came on him. No one, then, dared to brook that temper, and that day it was as if Birch was that man again. If he limped still, no one noticed it at all, which I love. I just love that it's like, just like it's this like it's almost he becomes legendary in this moment. Um,
Yeah, it's like super powered.
mhm.
This rage.
As for the skillmaster, he flailed and cursed, and then he grew still, and all suspected that he turned what he knew upon his captor. But if he did, it had no effect save that the stablemaster tightened his grip on the man's neck. And we know it has no effect because chivalry closed him off to the skill. And if Galen strove to sway others to his cause, they did not react. Perhaps being choked and dragged was sufficient to break his concentration, or perhaps his skill is not so strong as it was rumored, or perhaps too many remember his mistreatment of them to be too well to be vulnerable to his wiles, or perhaps, fool, get on with it. What happened? A light sweat cloaked my body, and I shivered, not knowing what I hoped for. I wasn't there, of course, the fool asserted sweetly, but I've heard it said that the dark man dragged the skinny man all the way up to the witness stones, and there, still gripping the skillmaster so he could not speak, he asserted his challenge. They would fight. No weapons, but hands only, just as the skillmaster had assaulted a certain boy the day before. And the stones would witness, if Birch won, that Galen had no call to strike the boy, nor had he the right to refuse to teach the boy. And Galen would have refused the challenge and gone to the king himself, except that the dark man had already called the stones to witness. And so they fought, in much the same way that a bull fights a bale of straw. And when he was done, the stablemaster bent and whispered something to the skillmaster, for he and all others turned and left the man lying there, with the stones witness to his whimpering and bleeding. What did he say? I demanded. I wasn't there. I saw and heard nothing of it. God, just the whole framing device of like the fool telling it as a story, and just there's like lots of like little writing choices there, which just I love.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Mhm. Yeah, sorry, I know that was a
That
long
whole
passage to like read aloud, but I'm being a little self-indulgent because that's my favorite part of the entire book. Okay, moving on to Fool's Room.
Yes.
I want to know why he has a baby.
Me too. I want to know what the baby is.
Hmm.
I was I
Like
was hoping
even
one of you guys would have an answer when I wrote that down.
like even
No
understanding
clue.
his characters more or his character more from reading, or I should say their character more from reading the rest of the books, I still don't understand why they have a baby in their room.
Like I was wondering if
Was
it
it
had
just
anything to do with like B. Like I was wondering if there's something I forgot there because like I was like, wait, white baby, but could it also be like a representation of like kind of like the fool lost their childhood, right? So maybe it's kind of like hungering for
Yeah.
like a time because they mentioned later on like the time when like it was just like his mom and him who called him beloved. Called
Yeah.
them beloved. I'm using him just because like that's what the book uses.
That's what
Obviously there's
Fitz
more.
uses. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously definitely not completely male or definitely gender fluid
Yeah.
in some way, but just for like
Yeah.
simplicity and book's sake, and just because that's too ingrained in my mind, I use that. But yeah, like I think it could just be like, man, I miss when I was a baby kind of thing. Wish I could go back to those simple times.
wonder
And the innocence that the fool had then.
Hmm.
we know that they become like a really good toy maker and carver. I wonder if baby is something they made themselves.
Oh,
Oh,
definitely.
absolutely.
I
Daily
think so.
practice. It's just so strange. It's so and
But
it's
Fitz said
so
that he thought it was a real baby, so it's, like, very,
yeah.
very lifelike too.
Hmm.
Right, and it's described in such detail. Like, there's a lot of things that Fitz kind of glosses over, and then every once in a while he'll describe something in like crazy detail. And this baby is one of those things, and it's like it sticks out as such a weird thing.
Hmm.
Then you never really get that much like clarity or closure around it.
I,
It's
w-
just
I
very
wonder if it's
strange.
like the way you mentioned that is if it's like Fitz is like other creature reaches out with the wit, and when the wit fails, is like forced to actually scrutinize it with eyes, which is why we get such a good
Yeah,
description of it.
I
Yeah,
bet.
true. Yeah.
And wasn't the fool in their room when Fitz came, and Fitz just didn't even notice because he can't feel the fool with his wit?
That could be because when Fitz apologizes later on, neither one of them brought up the fact that they were in their room. So how would the fool even know
Yeah, that's just
they
another
weren't in?
And
unexplained thing.
I also was wondering if maybe the fool had a dream that Fitz would come
Huh.
in and the Fool had to let Fitz come in to kind of open himself up to Fitz a little bit more to grow their connection, and he, like, just had to let that happen, or there were 2 different paths, and the first one was, "This is what happens if I lock the door and, like, don't let Fitz in," and Fitz ends up dying because everything that the Fool does is to keep Fitz alive because the world is against Fitz trying to kill him at all times. So maybe the Fool had to kind of let him in a little bit.
Mhm.
I think either's equally as likely. They were in the room or that it was like a dream.
Yeah, if they were in the room
Or
though,
maybe
like
it was
there's like
both.
a very like specific description of uh, like I forget the exact wording, but it's like Fitz like basically is like, yeah, there's definitely no one there just because of like how the room and stuff feels. Not even like I think necessarily the wit because like the Fitz already mentions that like he can't feel. I think he even mentions there that he can't feel the fool with the wit, so he's like, yeah. But then like I don't know, but like it would make sense if the fool was there because like how else would the fool know?
And I think Fitz has so much trouble feeling the Fool with his wit anyways because the first time the Fool gives him the prophecy with the dog, Fitz fixes Fat's feists or whatever, and then the Fool just disappears in the woods, like, walks behind a tree and is just gone. You know the Fool is still somewhere around there. Fitz just can't
Hmm.
feel him at all, so he thinks that
It's like
maybe the
Miss
Fool's room is empty too, even if it's not. And the Fool's, like, just standing very still, and he's like, "Fitz can't see me because he can't feel me."
Mm,
Fitz can be so unobservant because he's so used to relying on those other senses that, like, if something's like the forged ones, they'll just come up upon him, like, because he's not
Yeah,
listening. He's not like using his regular five senses to pay attention to his surroundings. He's just like, I know there's a deer over there because I
the
can
wit
feel.
will keep me safe.
Yeah. Yep.
all reliable.
Except it's clearly not, and we see that multiple times.
Which is also super interesting because I think that it like the first time we were reading through, I feel like I'm just like, why is every like obviously Bird should not be giving him as hard a time about the wit, but there's also like when we get to like Black Wolf and all of that, there's lots of stuff where it's like, yeah, the wit, like any other way of exploring the world, needs some like guidance to actually help you like contextualize it and know how and when to use it. And Fitz's lack of
Yeah.
education in that like sets him back of like a far ways and like makes it so that he doesn't actually
Yeah,
know
that's
how to
him
like.
and Night Eyes even.
Mhm. Okay. So is if unless there's anything else, could we hop back to chapter 16 then?
Yes,
Okay.
that was it.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. So chapter 16 lessons. Um so I think like ostensibly this is basically like post uh post getting Galen getting beaten up, Fitz goes back to his lessons, but I think the most interesting parts of this chapter come from when he goes down to town and talks to Molly.
Yeah.
And it's essentially part of him. There's yeah, there's lots of it is even though it's titled lessons, lots of it is more about him regaining his life outside of the realm of the skill lessons, which he was trapped in for a while. Um, let's see. Yeah, in the intro they mention the teaching of the skill fading, and that's always been something which bothered me a lot because I'm like, it's not solely like an offensive or wartime thing. Obviously, because of what the skill scrolls say, they knew even then like what a varied art it was. So how did they let it die out? I kind of feel like from the way they describe it, like King Bounty was paranoid, restricted it to the royal family. As a result, like not enough people were actually getting taught it, and so they're like since and royals are notoriously bad at like prioritizing, as we've seen in this book, so the knowledge doesn't get passed down properly, and then the normal people with skill aptitude, since they're no longer being searched for, either just think they're crazy, dismiss that skill aptitude, um, they just or they like people because people I think would definitely mistake something like that as the wit because they're like only the royal people have the skill, and then so they get punished for it and die
Yeah.
off, or they just get drawn to the mountains. That's also a distinct possibility. Yeah.
They just never
Yeah,
know.
I think
No one knew
I think
Nettle
all
skilled except for Fitz.
yeah.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, you have to kind of have someone who's already knowledgeable in the skill
know?
to find other skilled ones. And I think also maybe King Bounty started it, but Shrewd definitely made the skills so much more elite and something that was so like hidden and close to his like heart. He didn't let anyone else have because he's shrewd. And I think also it's probably with Solicity dying
They had
that
no one.
yeah, they didn't have anyone knowledgeable enough. And I think also if they mostly used it for wartime because the kingdom had had such a long time of peace and prosperity, they kind of just lost it, just like they lost their warriors and their like warships. Because I think later on it's talking about how it takes time to like change these merchant ships into something that'll fight against the red ship raiders because all of their people who did fight and were used to war were either really old or already dead.
Mhm.
Well, they're clearly a people that are like not great at record keeping because no one really knows what happened with King Wisdom. They're not great at like war because they've had to rely on the Elderlings in the past just to like win. They're they're just kind of stunted. They're like it's like Europe in the Dark Ages. They're like, well, we used to be able to make domes, but now we don't remember how. So that's basically where the six duchies are in this trilogy. They're like,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, and then in live ships we see
not
that
good.
like definitely people of the other countries think of the Six Duchies that way. They're like, there's barbarians. They don't even have glass in their windows, which we know that the Six Duchies
Yeah.
does. But like, it's definitely like a little bit of a hyperbolic representation of how like behind the times they are. Especially given like
Yeah.
we find out, especially the coastal duchies are built like mostly for functionality rather than like form or whatever, and they don't like and they kind of just like reinforce what they already have rather than like building something new. It's like I forget when it
Mhm.
is where Fitz goes to some other castle and he's like, "Oh, this is what castles are supposed to be like? I thought like they're supposed to be like Buckkeep, where there's like dogs or like no, actually it's Fitz returning to Buckkeep, uh, uh, in the Tawny Man, where he's like, oh, it where is the familiar common people and dogs and dirt and stuff that I grew up here? And it's like that's not normal for a castle, Fitz.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like Fitz is like, I took no satisfaction in his bruises or his disgrace, referring to Galen, and I'm like, that's very noble of you. I get why you say that, but I will take satisfaction in them for you, Fitz. Thank you very much.
Oh, I definitely did.
Mhm. And
Yeah,
especially
me
the
too.
thing of like, no one could doubt that the witness stones had found him unworthy. I think that's like the important thing. Like, and I wish there was like some repercussion there where like some of the skill candidates start to rethink what's going on. They're like, oh, like we thought Galen was so
Yeah.
great, but then he was able to be beat up by a
This
mere stable
all-powerful
master.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it should have shaken the faith of some of them, but maybe they're just too far, and that it only just increased their hate instead.
Yeah.
Okay. And then like a big section here comes from where uh Fitz goes to talk to Molly in Buckheap Town. I think you had something about this, right Al?
Yeah. I was a little bit surprised at how much Fitz keeps and like lies to Molly about. Because I just kind of assumed that like he told a little bit, but she doesn't know his real name. She doesn't know any of the things that he does. She doesn't know that he's a royal bastard. Like, she thinks he's an errand boy for the scribe and that he fell down some stairs and that's how he got, like, beaten damn near to death.
Like the worst excuse, the most generic, like.
Fell at night.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine how Molly feels when she even finds out just a small smidge about it, or, like, just his real name that he's been, like, that would really hurt me knowing that someone I thought that I knew and I thought that I was close with didn't even tell me their real name.
Oh yeah, trust issues for life, for sure. Like,
Yeah,
the
and we see that later on for sure, but
honestly, I think it's a miracle that Molly ends up, like, trusting him again, ever. Like, that's
yeah.
just the but yeah, like, and it's this thing of, like, Fitz always frames it as, like, "I need to protect Molly." They but, like, I think that's probably, like, 20% of the reason, and 80% of it is, like, selfish self-protection, where it's like.
I think he doesn't wanna see Molly to see him differently. He wants her to still see him as, like, new boy and this good person, even though he is a good person and stuff. He just has to do some, like, sketchy
Yeah.
things, and he can't explain it because I don't think he's, like, allowed to tell Molly that he's an assassin.
Mhm. And even outside of being an assassin, being a royal, he's too used to being treated
Yeah.
differently or singled out, and he likes being new boy, and I think it's a big form of it's literal escapism for him.
Yeah.
Um, oh yeah, one line here. New boy, I've never met anyone as immune to gossip as you seem to be, which I thought was kind of an interesting like it's essentially a rephrasing of what Shade said earlier, where it's like you have weird blind spots because again, like the whole
Yeah.
Galen being Queen Desire's bastard is definitely something that I would classify more as gossip than like actual like hard facts, and that just like sweeps over Fitz's head.
Mhm. He really misses everything.
Mhm.
Yes. Time.
And yeah, this whole oh,
Speaking
sorry,
of
go ahead.
this, like what the gossip they're talking about, it's about, if I remember correctly, it's about like Verity getting married, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Why do Shrewd and Verity think it's a good idea to have Regal choose the bride? Like, obviously it works out, but I just feel like they're being so stupid.
Probably Shrewd trusts
Yeah.
Regal way too much, and Verity kind of doesn't have a
Have
choice
to.
because he's
He's
like
too busy.
he's too busy, which we see come to a head in
He
a later
can't.
chapter.
Yeah.
Um,
I
there's
think
also.
that
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
I think it also could be kind of Shrewd testing the waters and seeing how well of, like, a diplomat Regal can be because I think he's banking on Regal becoming king. I think he probably knows that Verity's not gonna live forever,
Mm.
and
In fact,
he's
he's
just
almost
gotta
relying on it. He's burning.
test his replacement.
Yeah, he's burning Verity's wick at both ends and being like, "It's fine if you die." Like, I think there's like a later line where it's like, "Yeah, Shrewd will use any of us, Verity, me,
Yeah,
It
Fitz,"
says
and
that,
obviously
yeah.
I
like
kept that out.
yeah, and I think you mentioned this, and I noted it too, that Regal is conspicuously left off that list of people that Shrewd will use for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah, so Fitz says, "You were saying he would sacrifice me without qualm," and then it says Shade did not take his eyes from the fireplace, you, me, even Verity if he thought it necessary for the survival of the kingdom, but not himself or Regal.
Mhm. And apparently not Galen. I hate this shit because it's like Shrewd is supposed to be smart, but he keeps allowing people who like sow discord and like undermine the kingdom to have positions of power. Like Shrewd has zero
Yeah.
oversight, and I think he's also just like scared of conflict. Honestly, like I think you see it a little bit when him and Verity like start arguing. He's like he tries to play the reasonable diplomat, but like he just wants like I think he's used to people listening to him because he's king. And when things come to a point where he actually has to like do something contentious,
Justify.
he's like, "Ha, see ya."
I also think sometimes, like, it's not even what is best for the six duchies. Logically, it's just like what Shrewd wants.
Yeah.
Like,
And he convinces himself that it's the best.
Yeah, because he's been
yes,
brought
yep,
up as like,
he
you're
tells
shrewd, you're big, you've got big boy brain, and it's like, no.
yeah.
I think also Shrewd doesn't want to like throw away or waste any of the tools that are given to him, like because Galen is the skill master, he's got this knowledge and this information. So any way that Shrewd can use him, he will, and he won't end Galen if he still thinks that Galen could be useful to himself or the kingdom.
Mhm.
Yep.
Which on one hand, like, it makes sense in general, but it's also one of those things where like he is doing horrible like threat evaluation or threat assessment. Like he needs to do
Yeah,
like pull up the employee records and be like, wow, so you're telling me Galen trained no one for the past whatever years. Uh
right.
fucks up the person who is strongest in the skill and then gives Verity a useless coterie. Huh.
Yeah, that's the thing. It makes me really mad that Shade and Shrewd fail Fitz here in that they just let Galen, like, it's obvious that Galen has tried to murder Fitz twice now, and they just, like, let him get away with it because they're like, well, he's training a coterie. And it's like, yeah, he is, but he's doing bad at it. And he, like you said, fucks up the one person that's the strongest. Like, you're robbing Kingdom of this tool that Fitz could be if trained correctly. He could be incredible in the skill. Instead, he damages him almost beyond repair.
I love that like
And
oh sorry, go ahead.
I think that Shade can be like excused for this a little bit because he doesn't know how the skill works or like how or like even that skill commands are even a thing, but there's no excuse for Shrewd letting this continue.
No, and Verity even makes complaint about it, saying like Galen did this to Fitz, he fucked him up and clouded him, and it's a problem. And Shrewd's just like, meh.
Verity
He's
and
like, I'll do
Patience.
something about it.
Yeah, Verity and
And he
Patience are
does
the
nothing
only
about
people who consistently stand up for Fitz. And like if this had been anything but wartime, Verity it would have been so great for Verity to just be around for Fitz. Like Verity is like the one like male figure, male adult figure in Fitz's life who consistently cares for him. Chade and Birch cared for him at different times,
Mhm.
but they like use him or they have their own hang-ups. But Verity is just like, yeah, they I'm kind of perfect. I'm just kind of perfect friend for you, Fitz. If only I wasn't in the middle of
Yeah,
wartime.
you're my
Mhm.
nephew, let's be pals.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's even like there's a part where Fitz like maybe even like notices a slight wit thing with Verity, or just that Verity really loves dogs. Where he's like, I noticed a shadow of
Yeah,
the feeling at my loss for my dogs, and I was like, oh, never picked up on that, but that's really cool and another like little connection between them that I wish they could have explored more. 'Cause I think I even mentioned last
yeah.
episode that
They loved
like
their animals so much.
mhm, and but I didn't think it would be like so explicit a connection as this, where I'm like, ah, they just talked more. Um, yeah, okay, we're definitely jumping all over this episode, but I think that's fine, given
Yeah,
that
I
it's
was
a
gonna say, what chapter are
yeah,
we on?
given that's like a rereaders or whatever, I think it's like totally cool to like hop around a bit. Um, but yeah,
And
getting
so many things are connected. It's hard to just
Mhm.
stick to
yeah,
one chapter and be like, we're only talking about things in this
it
chapter
makes a lot more sense to
just
be
because so
like,
many things flow.
here's how this thread goes and like progressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Speaking of animals, there's something mentioned in chapter 16. It's like very brief, but they talk about like a new stall in Buckkeep Town that's selling animals. I wonder
Hmm.
if that is possibly the same stall that ends up selling Night Eyes. I feel like it is,
It
otherwise you wouldn't.
is, it definitely is.
I didn't
Because
Yeah.
Fitz was
recognize it, but it's so
already
cool.
telling the birds to like peck at this to try
Leave.
and escape. He's
Yeah.
like already trying to save some of them.
Yep.
That's a really good
It's
catch. Yeah.
almost time.
Ah,
I
I'm so
can't.
excited.
can hear that.
I miss him.
Can hear the howling for sure.
I'm so freaking excited. And, like, to see Night Eyes, like, young again and, like, playful, I loved when they would play and, like, Night Eyes would hunt him and he would be like, "Got you, got you. You would be dead now. I got you again." And, like, he just keeps winning. I'm like, "Oh, I
I
love
know.
it so, so much."
Mhm,
I literally miss him as if he's like a person that I really know.
mhm.
Yeah, he's our friend, for sure.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's definitely like in his later years, he still has like that playful mood, but then you can see like his age and age
His
of the body
body's
catching up, and it's like, don't get old.
yeah.
Like, oh yeah, so much of the series is about like aging and like what you do as you get older, and I feel like the first like real hit of that is with Night Eyes, like dying. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Oh, definitely. Because Fitz pretends like he's this old man forever, but, like, he's not. He just
Talks
pretends like he's old and can't do anything,
mhm,
and Night Eyes is over here, like, actually aging, like, about to die, and Fitz is like, "Oh, I'm so old. I can't do anything anymore. Calm
acts like he's
down."
so old and Tawny Man, and it's like, bitch, you're in your 30s. Come
I
on.
know. What the heck?
But I mean, I guess to him that's what old age is because in like this series, like,
Yeah.
oh Burrich, she's ancient, fucking Chase,
Yeah.
probably on his deathbed tomorrow, and it's like, no,
Oh
it's
my god.
It's also like the way a lot of people are. Like, I complain about being old all the time, and I'm only 28. Like,
mhm,
I'll be like, oh, my back. I'm ancient.
mhm.
I'm
My
dying.
poor knees. A storm's coming. I can feel it in my knees. Totally.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh god. Okay, so speaking of animals, there is one section that I loved. There's one line. It's when in chapter 16 when Fitz and Molly are back together and Smithy's with them. I think that's what this section is. Smithy whines to get some attention and Fitz says, "I envied him the ability to whine so well. My own seemed to go unheard." And I was like, I loved that. But I think Fitz's whine isn't like how we think of whining. Like he's not being a whiny kid, but his is like an animal's whine. Like he needs something.
He needs connection, love, affection, all that good stuff.
Everything he's not getting.
Regular people need.
Hmm. Yeah, speaking of like the whole Fitz and Molly section, I think that this whole thing was like super like just cute and juvenile, and I like there's like this innocence of like young love and like dancing that dance. It's one of like the few moments where like I'm like truly well and truly behind Fitz and Molly's relationship. It's just like and I
Mhm.
and like going back to what you were saying about like Fitz like lying to Molly. It's so much more tragic as well because like we see like how Fit in this section how Fitz is like almost stupidly honest, where he doesn't even think about his
Mhm.
words. He's just like, yeah, like I'm just saying stuff.
You
I had
want a royal?
yeah, like
They're not good enough for you.
yeah, and like just not thinking about the implications of his words at all. And it's just like
Yeah.
if Fitz never had these secrets to hide, he would just be like such a open and honest person, and it's such a sad thing to see. The
Oh, definitely.
which
I don't think he
obviously
would have a
his
filter at
dishonesty,
all.
yeah, his dishonesty is still his own fault, but it's obviously the circumstances push him into situations where that part of himself becomes more necessary, I suppose.
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh yeah, also, this is an incredibly minor thing, but I love Edda forbid you'd be wasted on them. They wouldn't have the wit to understand you or the heart to appreciate you. I'm like, is that intentional? The wit? Huh?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Could
Could
be.
be. Um, and I love Fitz's reflection here on what Galen's how manipulative Galen's training was. I was bribed with the offer of knowledge as another man might have been bribed with coin, and like for the other people, it was bribed with uh, aspirational quality of like being valued for something over yourself. being part of something bigger than yourself, being like collaborative thing. Like it's really like reflecting on kind of how easy it is to like manipulate people and like and how
Hmm.
like in the sense of like and it's almost like it's still obviously a person's fault for whatever actions they choose to commit in there, but it's also like I feel like it's really easy sometimes, like, at least, I don't know, I was thinking about this recently because there's like I watched a YouTube video, which is like former cult member it talks about cult stuff, and it's like, it's really easy to like blame people who are in those situations, or like, how could you be so stupid to get in there? But it's really just playing on that natural human need for connection, and it's very easy to get
Hmm.
suckered into it. So I love like this reflection on it where it's like, wow, these people I've known my whole life, I was willing to like throw under the bus just for because Galen fulfilled this one need.
Just so that I could learn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Something else about Galen that's oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, just comparing it to a cult is like really good comparison because a lot of cult leaders will like give people
They
things and
isolate
deprive
you.
them and like isolate them, and when they deprive them, then by giving them like little things, they secure more loyalty.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
that's
they seem
Which
like they're
Galen
so
like does.
generous
He's
because
like,
they're giving
like
you
what is it
one
like?
decent thing.
He's like, oh yeah, you can have like a
He
little piece
lets
of
them
the
wear
fruit.
shoes outside
Yeah.
now.
mm,
Yeah,
like it's very manipulative and very culty.
definitely. Another thing about Galen that's super shady is when he's explaining that they're going to be tested, and then whoever comes back and passes the test will be part of the coterie and will be given to Shrewd during the like festival or whatever. And Galen says, I myself shall present you to your king, and he shall see the wonder of what I have wrought. And Galen says, your king, not our or my king. Like we can already see that his loyalties do not lie with Shrewd.
That is a good catch. I would not have seen that. I would just assume that it's like, yeah, you're king because like I'm talking to you, but it also makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense that it's like, yeah, no, my king's regal.
Yeah, Galen's shady.
Mhm. And yeah, I guess speaking of the test, like Fitz kind of repeats like I would fail a bunch of times, and I wonder how much of that is like an accurate assessment of like Galen not allowing him to succeed, and how much of that is just like Galen's depression being like, yeah, you can't succeed, you're a failure, you're gonna fail. Because like the specific repeat
I think it's
wording,
mostly that.
yeah, because like the specific wording of like I would fail, I will fail, I'm going to fail, like just that repetition like really
I
stuck
can't
out to me.
skill. I don't know how to skill. I have no ability to skill.
Hmm.
It's all Galen.
Hmm. And yeah,
Yeah, but I also think a little bit of it is just Fitz being realistic because he is right. Like Galen never sends him a message or tries to send him a message. Galen
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
have a horse. Galen drops him off by Forge right when a red ship is coming.
North of Forge. Like, what
Yeah,
the heck? He
he
has to
has to
go
walk
through Forge to
directly
get
through
home.
Forge.
mhm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one thing I didn't
We
get.
can probably just move into that chapter. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I guess like one last thing is just like I didn't know what a catamite meant when I the first few times I read this chapter, and like when I eventually decided to look it up on like the second reread of the book, it was like, oh, like it just feels like Galen's entire worldview is so warped. It's just oh yeah, I guess if anyone reading doesn't know, it's uh like a it's an ancient term, not ancient, but like a yeah, I guess ancient term for like a boy kept for like essentially like homosexual sex practices. So he's basically saying like
Like a little sex slave, kind
pretty
of.
much, and he's like, "Are you that to Burrich?" And Fitz obviously doesn't know what the word means, and he's like, "What?" But like, yeah,
He doesn't even mention Rich
He doesn't
specifically.
even say Birch's name, so Fitz
Mm.
probably thinks it's something with Smithy and
He
something
thinks
about
it's
his wit.
Fitz also doesn't know what catamite means, and he's just like, "Are you his catamite that he lets you draw strength from him?" So Fitz thinks he knows about Smithy and he's somehow like drawing strength from Smithy, but just from like context clues and knowing what that word means, you can assume that Galen thinks that he's like Birch's little sex toy, and in exchange, Birch lends him strength for skilling, when really it's just Fitz's own strength, and Galen can't comprehend that like a bastard could be that strong in the skill.
Mm-hmm. And I guess he probably thinks that as well because, like, Birch was chivalry's kingsman, so he's like, yeah, chivalry. He doesn't know about the skill block, so he's like,
And Birch beat the shit out of Galen because he hurt Fitz.
yeah.
That could be definitely.
And he
And then,
can't fathom someone would just love Fitz genuinely, like as a son. He's like, you must be having some type of sexual relationship for him to want to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
God, it's just so twisted. Like, and like, I wonder again, and like, obviously this doesn't justify anything, but like, I was wondering if like he feels that way because he never got affection from like his parents, and so he's like, there's no way there could be a parental bond. Those don't exist. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Probably.
Definitely.
Mhm. Okay, but yeah, I think with that, yeah, we can move on to the actual trial and being dropped by Forge. This was a long chapter. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
they you could summarize the events that happened like really easily. It's like the Fitz gets dropped off north of Forge. He he has a dream in which Smithy, Birch and Smithy get stabbed. He tries to get home. Smithy dies before he gets home. He fights a bunch of forged ones and kills them out of anger. And then he like
Walks all the way home.
Mm-hmm. But like the actual like prose of it makes you really feel how harrowing the journey is. Like you feel like each part
Oh, yeah.
and it like because of how drawn out it is, you feel like, oh man, it's taking so long. Get home. You got to get home before Smithy dies.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole time, Smithy is like drowning in his own blood and like dying of a stab wound. This poor puppy was dying for days, just alone.
My thing is, why didn't anybody like step in and take care of him or try and save him? Like, what happened to all the stable boys?
Well, I think Rich is like knocked out the whole time, and it happens like up in the
Right.
loft. So
But if they
they're
find
probably just
Birch,
like,
they should have found Smithy.
I don't think they did find
Yeah.
Birch, because Birch says he was out and then he like woke up.
But then he was in the
I think
infirmary by the time, oh,
Fitz
actually, maybe they found him
got home
after
like
Smithy died. Okay.
days. Yeah, Fitz got home like days later after everything. I think Burrich was like out and woke up like 2 days later, and Smithy was either like on his last legs or dead, and Burrich somehow got himself to the infirmary. That's the way I interpreted it, at least.
That makes a lot more sense.
Or he at least got himself out into a public place where someone could see him and carry him to the infirmary.
Mhm.
I
He
think
might not have
Burrich
gotten all the way up
had
there.
either tried to heal the dog before himself, if he had like known Smithy was injured, or put him out of his misery.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's so sad when Smithy gets stabbed, and it's like, I called out for my boy, but he didn't come.
I know, it breaks my fucking heart.
It's so sad.
And like
Oh,
that's what he calls Fitz is like boy, like
my boy.
it's
So
so
sad.
sad.
Mhm.
And he gets night
That's
eyes.
the part that I think gets me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, especially as a pet owner, it hits so hard. Because you're like, oh, you're his person, and he like needs you, and you can't be there. Like I
Yeah.
can like feel the anger and the like, desperation that Fitz feels. Like, I have to get back
Mm.
right now for Smithy. Like it's poignant.
Mhm. know why,
You
but the
can
part
feel
that
it,
like
like,
really hits
I
me is where like Fitz is like Fitz like reaches out and then he sees how much energy it takes for Smithy to respond and he's like, "No, it's cool. I'm coming." And then like just that like recognition of like Smithy's state and needs and just being like, "Okay, you, I'm coming for you. Don't worry." Just ah. And like I think it really shows how much he cares for Smithy and uh Burrich is that like before that happened, he was just full of like doubts and like stuff and whatever. He was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna fail. I don't know what I'm doing." And then as soon as it happens, he's like, "Okay, I'm getting back to Bucky. I empathize. We're doing this." And he like there's little parts later where he's like, "All I felt was fear" or whatever. But like, there's never like any indication that like that changes his actions. He's just always like, "I need to get home. I need to get home. I need to get home."
I do think it's interesting that almost all of his focus is on Smithy, even though he knows that Burrich also was attacked. Like I think he thinks about
Birch is
Burrich,
always an afterthought.
but yeah, it's an afterthought. He'll be like, I wonder if Burrich is still alive. Smithy. Which is fair because Burrich has not been super great to him
I
a
mean, it's also
lot.
because he literally can feel Smithy's life force.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
we
he
know
always is
he
like, I have to get back for Smithy. And then there's a period and it's and Birch, period.
Mhm. And then
Yeah.
but he even says like like um oh where's the line? Not just a dog, Smithy, my friend, and it wasn't only him. I gave up on the wait and came back for you, thinking you might need me. Smithy died days ago. I knew that. Where like
Yeah.
dog, like I knew Smithy was gone. I love him and I cared about him, wanted to come back for him, but like I wanted to come back for you. I didn't just give up when Smithy died. Mhm.
And Burrich is just like a bitch after
I
he
know he's
says
such an
that.
ass right here.
It's so
No,
sad
Burrich
too
is
because
like
like
actually mad in this chapter.
yeah, because like right before that, like it's like Springfest, and Fitz like, wow, this reminded me of when I first came to Buckkeep, when the I was there with Burrich, and not once did he put me on another's horse or entrusted my care to another. I'm like, why are you doing this to me? I know what's coming. You really have to be
I
like,
know.
"Fuck."
And then he's like, bring me nothing, do me no favors, go your own way and be whatever you will. I'm done with you. Like,
He's
oh my
acting
God.
like a child, which is just acting like a little baby that didn't get his way.
It's just
Like, you're a grown ass man, a parent. Like, your kid did something you don't like. Fuck it up. Happens to everybody.
it just goes to show like
Yeah.
how deep this like anti-wit bigotry runs. And then it's just like
Yeah.
Particularly in Burrich, but he also thinks that Fitz. The thing that bugs me is Burrich never really conveys the danger of using the wit in this like country and this climate.
mhm,
He's just like,
Yeah.
do it. And
It's bad.
Fitz doesn't understand why, so he just continues to do it with like reckless abandon. If
mhm.
Burrich like actually sat him down and was like, look, I understand that you want to be friends with dogs, but if you do that so noisily, someone will cut you up and hang you over water and then burn your body parts.
Yeah, and like,
Like,
but Birch is really bad at talking. Like, and I think like a thing to point to this is like before, like when he tries to warn Fitz before he goes into Galen's training, he takes like 10 minutes going around and around to just get to like Galen dangerous, be careful. He's just
Yeah.
yeah, they're both, and we see like even about like emotions and stuff like other times, they're just both really bad at talking to each other. Um,
Yeah.
And yeah, that whole conversation is so painful because like there's also like right before that we're just like, oh, you failed in the skill test, and like Fitz is like, no, it's okay. As you told me, there are other things in my life, and this chapter is like, ha, not if I have anything to say about it. You're losing
Psych.
everything. Yeah.
He was a
mm,
Smithy, Burrich, his chance of being in a coterie, and Molly all in one chapter.
Mhm. Well, I mean, he does retain one thing from
This
Burrage,
poor
which is the
kid.
amazing coping method of getting yourself
Of
blackout drunk.
drinking away your life.
Yeah. God.
Still has patience, but he doesn't like let himself
Oh yeah, he still has
be
like
attached.
patience. The fool.
He pushed himself away from her for a minute, though, and I thought he was sassy and mean to the fool.
Oh yeah, he was being
Or was
like
that
no he was yeah
He
before?
was
no he was being a
sassy.
dick.
He was
Like
like
but
He was an
he was
ass.
being like really self-destructive, which is both a component of Fitz being dumb and also we know that part of it is Galen's thing because he when like Verity finally
Yeah.
like pushes it away, he's like, "Oh yeah, I wasted an entire season when normally I would be like on top of things."
Hmm.
also just a teenager, and teenagers suck.
Pretty much.
That's true. I kind of forget that like Fitz is still young,
He's like
and so he's
14. Yeah, that's like
very
the worst age.
yeah. Teenagers are very sucky.
Mhm.
They're mean,
Yeah, but
so it
apparently
kind of makes sense that Fitz is kind of a shit.
Yeah, but apparently 14 is enough to be a man in this world because he gets the man ceremony at the start of this chapter, which I always find
Yeah.
hilarious
I
when I read these
loved it.
books, where it's like Fitz is like, here are the inner workings of the monarchy, here are like the secrets of the skill. Um, I'm witted, by the way. Putting all of this on paper, but the details of the man ceremony, oh no, that's too secret. Can't write that down. It's like really that's the
I
thing
Really,
you
know what
choose
the
to
heck.
admit. But yeah, and like I
really
love
would
that
like
his
to know. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I love that his man name comes out to Catalyst or Changer because that's the truest name that he's ever had.
Yeah.
I would love to know who like nominates him or who's like his man, because I would
Yeah.
assume it is Rich or Verity, but then that name Catalyst or Changer you would think comes from the Fool, but I highly doubt the Fool has this type of societal pull to be able to like nominate someone for a man ceremony.
Yeah, I
You
thought it was
know?
Burge, and then like
Well,
the name was kind of just like a coincidence. Like it's just like one of those like
it could also have been Shrewd, and the fool gave him that name. Gave Shrewd the name and was like, "Here, this is a good name. It sounds funny." And then Shrewd was like, yeah, let me use that."
Didn't occur to me at all, but that's very possible. Another thing that I noticed is that he says in that intro, nor have I ever found any with whom I chose to share the knowledge of my man name. And I just think that's interesting because why not Molly or Fool or even Night Eyes? Like you would
Or
think Night
even,
Eyes would do
yeah,
that.
I think somehow Night Eyes does know a little bit because he does call
Calls him
Fitz
Changer.
Changer.
Yeah.
yeah. I think that there's like it could definitely be Shrewd, but I also feel like Shrewd is not the type to care enough. Like Shrewd is just like
Right.
I'll look in on you when I need you, but otherwise like fucking do whatever you want. I feel like it's just kind of one of those like things converging. It's just fate because he is the changer, so naturally at some point he will be ascribed that name.
His nature is so strong. It just has to be this. There's no other name it could be.
Hmm. And I like that it mentions that because there is obviously like Burge is like his main sponsor, but I like that it mentions that there's also other people who have to sponsor him, and that's obviously the men at arms. And I like that because it's again like a return to like Fitz relating to and empathizing with the common people, which is something that he really lost during Galen's training.
Yeah.
Also thinks that like he thinks of himself as this isolated person, like he doesn't have anybody, no one cares about him or no one understands him. But obviously enough like men at arms like him and care about him to go in on this ceremony. So it shows that like even though he just has such a skewed view of himself, he doesn't realize that like all these people are going to back him for this ceremony.
Hmm.
I think he's like I have no close relationships, and then like he has several close relationships. Well, I'm isolated and no one cares about me. Several people, like most people in the keep, know about him and care about him. It's just like I think it's also one of the things where like again he's very bad at like I almost feel like there's a thing in between like the wit and verbal communication, which is that like body language type stuff, which he just completely misses. Where like you can tell when
Mhm.
someone's like warm towards you, or
Mhm.
just like he only sees it with like Molly, basically, and like everyone else sees. I feel like with most other people, he's just like there's either verbal communication or what I am feeling from your feelings. Everything else is just not exist because he just doesn't look at people.
And I wonder, it probably also stems from, like, the fact that both of his parents pretty much abandoned him at such a young age, so maybe he just has it in his mind that no one will love or care for him because if he couldn't even make his parents stay with him and take care of him and want to be with him, like, how could anybody else who didn't help create him, like, how could they wanna be around him and care about him enough to stay and, like, love him?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's just something that Fitz grapples with like the entire series
Yeah,
Forever, I think.
forever.
for always. Speaking of Fitz's name, finds out that he actually has a name in this like section of the book in chapter 18. Verity calls him Fitz Chivalry Farseer, and it's like the first time we ever see that whole name or hear, and the first time Fitz ever hears it. And I noticed that Verity says he wrote it, but he doesn't say he named him. He just says, "That's your name. I wrote it. I wrote it down when you were brought to me." So I wonder if Chivalry gave him that name.
Could
If
be.
Verity like skilled to him like, "Hey, kid just got dropped here." I can't imagine he wouldn't have skilled to him. Like they could skill to each other. He just says he wrote it, so I just thought that was like an interesting. He thinks that his parents didn't name him, but Chivalry could have named him and said like, "Name him this," and he writes it down in the logbook.
Sure. But I think like for the purposes of the story, I almost feel like Fitz takes it as Verity giving him a name. And I think because like
Yeah.
which like it's interesting because it's also like coming back to like I think he almost feels abandoned by his parents, but then he's like, Verity is here right now and he's telling me this. So it's basically him giving me this name. Like that's the vibe I got from the way Fitz reacts.
Yeah, I think Fitz definitely thinks Verity gives him the name, but I personally think that
Oh yeah, no.
he.
It's probably what chivalry would give him.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely don't think it's patience because I think patience would give like a much less descriptive and much more fun name. Tom, you're Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one last thing in chapter 17 that I wanna touch on just really quick, um, about kind of Fitz's wit. When he first gets dropped into the trial and he is, like, kind of scoping out the area and seeing what it is, he says, "It was hilly country, but I could scent the sea and a low tide to the east somewhere." And he says scent instead of smell. And I just was like, it's gotta be Smithy or, like, just his wit in general that kind of swayed him to say scent, because I think that anybody else would
Would
have
have
said,
said.
"I could smell the sea."
Oh
I
yeah.
wonder if that's like intrinsic just way of his thinking, like the way he refers to B as his cub later on.
Yeah, I think so. Just because he grew up so close to animals that he's like
Mhm.
that's kind of how he sees the world.
His like because he wasn't raised talking about the wit or understanding the wit, the line is blurred between like what's his own thought and what's the sense of animals around him because he can't really distinguish that. It's just so ingrained in him.
Mhm. Okay, I guess Oh yeah, I had one last thing before we move on to, which I just when I scrolled back up, which is um Burrage calls Fitz a young buck, which is obviously just like a general like term slash like simile. But I was like, buck? That also makes sense in context because he's a farseer, so he is a young buck. There's really nothing to this that
Yeah.
dramatic. I just thought it was fun, just a fun thing to point out.
He literally is a young buck.
Hmm. I
And
guess
I love that Birch does the same thing that Fitz does and like calls kids like animals, basically.
Mhm.
Like Fitz is a young buck and B is like a pup or a cub.
mhm. Just to, it's like it's like
Mhm.
you guys were mentioning. It's so much because he was brought up in the stables and brought up
Mhm.
and like has
I
been with animals, sharing minds with animals for so long. He's like, yeah, that is the term that you call a child.
This is correct, not baby.
Mm.
Okay, so moving into the next chapter, chapter 18, assassinations. Um, this is basically the first time that, or not the first, but like first time that Fitz does some like mass killings. It's he kills a lot of forged ones, and he does also assassinate a minor lordling. Um, in the meantime, lots of stuff is developing with forging and the general sense of uh, essentially, I guess, chaos that's happening. Shade invites Fitz back after several months, and there's sort of like tension there that we can discuss. Um, and then Fitz meets with Verity, finds out, oh man, he's been skilling himself half to death. Um, and the chapter ends with a long conversation slash conflict between Shrewd and Verity, which ends with Verity basically being like, "Yo, you can find me a wife, but I can't leave here. My work is too important." And I didn't notice this on first blush, but I love like the double meaning of assassinations being what Fitz is doing, but also the task that Verity set out to do.
Mm.
Mhm.
One thing I noted
I
in the
didn't even think about it like that.
beginning of this chapter mentions that at this point, over 1,000 people have been forged. And this is like a relatively early point in the story, and there are already over 1,000 people, and we still have
Yeah, that's a
two
lot.
books to go where people are still getting forged. Like for a small like medieval country, that's a shit ton of people.
Mhm.
And then they're like
That's multiple
basically,
towns.
and not only are they like not productive members of society anymore, they're a hazard to society. So it's like they've lost
They're
1,000 people
destructive.
their economy, and then they like have added 1,000 like
Murder
possible
zombies.
disasters.
Mhm.
Yeah, yep, like that would be crippling. Is crippling.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
don't know if it's this chapter that they mention it, but like there's this whole thing of like people like moving wholesale out of the coastal duchies. Um, and
Mm.
with that, the economy is starting to fall apart because you no longer have like trade happening, and without trade, um, the inner duchies are like also kind of like their main economy is from like exporting goods to like for trade. So like everything's going kind of haywire. But but the inland duchies don't see it that way because they're dumb.
They're just pissed about their taxes getting raised.
Hmm.
They're literally like, well, it doesn't affect me, so I don't care.
Um,
I think Fitz and Verity kind of win each other over in this chapter. Like before, they're like loose, friendly acquaintances. And then after this, they really bond because Fitz is like tasked to bring him food, but then on top of that, he kind of like livens up Verity's living quarters, or like Verity falls asleep that one time and he
He
sits there and
covers
waits.
them up.
Yeah, Verity thinks that they told Kate and Shrewd told him to do that, and Fitz is just like, no. And then I think that kind of wins Verity's heart. He's like, this kid cares about me. And
Hmm.
same token, Verity wins Fitz by like unclouding his mind and just like speaking to him like a regular person.
Yeah, think about
treating him like the family that he is.
like Fitz winning Verity is like in the next chapter before Fitz goes off to Jape. Verity is like, speak well of me to her, believe. I feel like you've always talked well of me. And it's just like, yeah, they've definitely like there's that. And like Fitz really
It's a mutual
every
thing, I
time
think.
Verity comes up, Fitz is like, yeah, like I like him.
I like
Verity's
him.
nice.
I like him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. And it's usually in contrast to the other royals. Like Shrewd and like, I don't like Regal that much, but Verity's always nice. And it's just like, and now that in this chapter it's taken to like a more personal level.
That's like all Fitz needs to win him over. It's literally, he's like, Verity's nice to me.
Oh, and he cares
And
about
that's enough.
dogs? Word?
His,
Okay.
yeah, his undying loyalty. To the point where he'll like
Yeah.
risk his life for him.
Mm.
Like,
Or
so
give his body to him.
Mm.
that too. Yeah.
He said, "You need me, Verity? I got you."
Got you.
Verity just
Another
like
thing I
drinking him like a fucking milk carton. Just whoop.
Yeah. And then Fitz doesn't get a headache. I noticed that on this like, Verity drains him and he's having this whole skill conversation. And in later books, just that much of skilling would have like debilitated Fitz with a migraine. He doesn't get a headache after this. So I wonder if the headache thing is because of the poisoning or the beating or both that he gets like at the end of this book that causes the seizures.
I know that some of it is due to like that head lump that Burge points out. But it might be that like the pain, like the lump is what was like preventing skilling, and then like the pain itself comes from injuries from the poisoning at the end of this book.
I would think if it came from that, he would have gotten a headache in this section because it says after Galen beat him and put the block.
Definitely.
Sure. Oh yeah, one thing that I like noticed here, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I was just like, Verity almost says like he says like Galen was Queen Desire's, and then he says pet, but then he was very obviously going to say bastard. And then Verity goes on to say Galen has no finesse. He is as coarse as his mother was, and just as presumptuous. And then like I read this and I'm like, how did I miss this the first time? Like I was just like these are like big bombshells being dropped that I should have picked up on, but it's just kind of like, oh yeah, we don't know Galen's mother. I guess his mother sucked. Okay, and I just
Right. And apparently Verity knew his mother.
Mm-hmm. And then it's just like, oh, duh, because he was just talking about Queen Desire, who we know is coarse and awful. Like,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so obvious on a reread, but I did not catch it at all on my first read.
It's one of those things where like I'm almost like, did someone come in and change the book? Is this like V 1.5 or something? Like,
Was
hold
this
on.
here the first time?
Yeah. Oh yeah, another thing I noticed, I guess, like going back to like the Chade and Fitz conversation, I was like, I had a lot written here about how I was like mad with Chade, for like his lack of empathy for Fitz, and I think it's kind of just like, on reflection, it's just that like Chade Chade is definitely bad here and is not treating Fitz his age, but also is horribly out of touch with how to communicate with other humans and like tries to make an effort at empathizing. Um,
Mhm.
but like a specific line was where Chade is like ruminating on like Verity needing help with the skilling, and Fitz is like, I took that as a rebuke for my failure. I think that's part of that is like Fitz being self-pitying in general, but and also like Galen's like depression beam. But I think the real thing is
Yeah.
like Shade is mad at himself here. He's like, if only I could have learned the skill if I wasn't a
He
bastard.
wants to learn it.
Hmm.
Well, and I think he tries to convince subtly Fitz to tell him or like teach him a little bit of it. And Fitz is like, no, we can't do it. I can't teach you because we shouldn't even know it anyway.
Yeah,
And like that must hurt Shade so bad
you can like
because
see
he
the
thought that
hunger when
maybe he
Fitz
would
is
have a
like,
little chance.
he's like, I know. Did you learn a little bit of the techniques? The skill scrolls don't tell me anything. It's like the foreshadowing for when Shade actually has that knowledge. Him going so ham with the skill scrolls.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think that like was really just Shade speaking out loud to himself and trying to weigh like pros and cons and what they need or what they don't need. But Fitz is so hard on himself that he takes it personally. I highly
Hmm.
doubt Shade was like intending to say anything about him in particular. He was just
Yeah.
like, if only we could help. Oh,
Mhm. Oh yeah, there's like a minor line here which I noted, which is like they refer to Chalced here as the southernmost duchy. M- Is am I crazy? I thought Chalced was like a different state. Is it?
is I didn't
Yeah,
catch
it
that.
is.
Yeah,
I didn't either.
yeah.
I think that at this point in the story, their relationship is closer though, because there's another part in an earlier chapter where they're talking about Regal's tasting women, and they say like, "Here they come from Calced or Chalced," and like
Yeah.
they're decked out in all these fancy things. And by the time you
Gotcha. It
get to
might be
like
like
Tommy
a
Man,
yeah. It might be like an inland duchies versus coastal duchies and other things. I remember like the coastal duchies like hate Chalced and like go to war with them on the regular, and like also there's the whole slaver thing, which I was like that seems like it would not fly in the six duchies. Um, but yeah. Okay, I think like the next big thing in this chapter is the discussion between Shrewd and Verity at the very end. Um,
Hmm.
and man, it's just such a confirmation of like what a weak leader Shrewd is. He's like he has like some good ideas, but overall he's just so bad at like prioritizing and recognizing what needs to be done. He gets stuck on a plan and then he can't like listen to other people.
it also shows how out of touch he is, because Verity's like basically pouring his heart out, being like, I know you don't love me as much as you love like chivalry and Regal. And he's, as a son, needing validation from his father here or like affection. And instead, Shrewd's just like, you need to work on your jealousy.
And
But like,
Yeah. What the
it's not even that he's
fuck?
out of touch, is that he's almost like being manipulative. He's like trying to like steer like Verity, we don't have time for jealousy, and it's like he very much knows that what Verity is saying is true. Or if he doesn't, he's just lying to himself
Oh yeah.
hardcore. Because like Verity is dropping
No, I
truth
think that
bombs
he
here.
knows.
Like Verity has like the perfect read on the situation.
mm,
Yeah.
And once again, like I feel like Verity, he's always been told he's the second son, but I feel like he has a better grasp on these situations than anyone else gives him credit for, and he should have been given a higher leadership position than at the very least fucking Regal. Like Regal gets like to be head of the treasury when he comes back, and Verity is just stuck like he you can have the war effort, and it's like fucking what?
Yeah.
Regal's like the worst person to put money. He's just like, I'm gonna buy myself
Yeah.
whatever I want, do whatever I want. It's like, oh my
Hmm.
God.
And you know the kingdom doesn't have enough money because they're taxing everybody a ton. So like not the smartest decisions.
Yeah, and you even have here like because this ramps up heavy next book, but even here you have like Regal spending a lot and then essentially being very clever at convincing the people outside the keep who don't know him that well, that it's a reasonable expense, which is like he gets decked out in finery to go out and meet with all these people, and like the common folk are like, yeah, we need to show that the six duchies is wealthy and has power, um, which but
At
like
least the common folk of the inland duchies. I feel like the coastal duchies never really like him.
or at least
Yeah.
I don't think people in Buck who know him personally do. But like I need to know like I feel like Regal has like kind of an excellent gossip network, or just like of just like a group of people around him who know how to make him seem good, even if he's awful. Because he gets like a terrifying amount of support going into Assassin's Quest, despite like
Hmm.
and like the main resistance is Patience and Shade from Buckkeep.
Yeah.
Yeah, another line which just made me so angry. It's like, you have a grievance, but we cannot have discord within the keep itself right now. Can you carry it with you until you can settle it quietly for the king's sake? And I'm like, I didn't see all you motherfuckers running to chastise Burrage for what he did at the Witness Stones. Why is it that like Fitz is the only one who can't do anything? Okay, it's because he's a royal, and they would see it as like inter-royalty infighting, or like, and that would push Fitz's status up or whatever. Still, I hate it. It's dumb. Fitz deserves better.
It's a lot. It's allowed for Galen to sow discord, keep by trying to murder Fitz, but Fitz isn't allowed to like upset by it.
Retaliate.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you mentioned, like Shrewd later promises Verity that some action will be taken, but I almost feel like Shrewd is relieved when Galen dies, because it's like, whew, don't have to actually take action. That would be asking too much
Right.
of me.
I don't think he ever would. I think he would have just given him a talk the way he gives Regal a talk at the end of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
You
I
shouldn't have
know
done that.
you shouldn't have tried to murder your nephew. That wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
Up
Plotting
on the
against the
wrist.
crown? Naughty, naughty. Because he was also plotting against Verity too. It's fucking insane.
Mm-hmm.
They
Like,
try to murder Verity too.
like this entire series would not have happened if Shrewd was just a better ruler. Or I guess like if like any of like, and the problem is like Verity having a spine, because like nothing short of treason would have stopped Shrewd. Honestly, if Chade was like actually more on top of what the kingdom needed, I straight up feel like he would have just slipped the same way that he slipped that forged girl, just Shrewd like a triple sleeping draught. Put him out of his pain, put him
Mm-hmm.
out of his misery, set up for a stronger leader. But he just never believes in Verity, which is just so dumb.
Once Shrewd dies, everything's worse. I feel like it would have been better to slip Regal the sleeping stuff.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, okay, the reason that it's bad once Shrewd is gone is because Verity is in the mountains, not around, and Regal just neatly
That's
fills
true.
up that power vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that like at least the coastal duchies would have had a really strong claim for Verity being a worthy king over Regal, because it's like, hey, he's older, he was born to the first queen, he worked with chivalry. Like, hell, they get a lot of mileage even out of supporting Fitz, and Fitz is like 100% behind Regal in the line. So I think if Verity had been around, it would have been a much different story.
Yeah.
Hey.
One thing I want to note before we move on is during that little fight, Fitz says, "They both seem to have forgotten entirely about me. I made myself small and unobtrusive, nibbling on my biscuit as if I were a mouse in a corner." And all I can picture is Fitz in the corner with like a little bag of popcorn, just like eating away, watching this drama unfold. And I loved that so much. I'm sure that's definitely not like the vibe that was supposed to be gotten from it, but just now with all the memes of stuff like that, like I can't unsee
Unsay
that. Once I've read that, I'm like,
Like
yes.
that gif of Bill Hader eating the popcorn with like a grin on his face, like, oh shit.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Also, this felt, now that you mention it, this feels like an interesting parallel with the Fool as well, because we see the Fool kind of like sitting in the corner for lots of these exchanges. I think like starting next book as well. The one that comes to mind most clearly is when Shrewd and Fitz get into that argument about um, marrying was is it Felicity, the Duke of Brondy's daughter, and like Fitz is like, no, actually, I want to marry Molly, and then like at the end of that conversation, the Fool is just like in the corner angry. But I feel like, yeah, lots of the time that's kind of like the Fool's role in the next book, to like be there and
Mhm.
listen. Um, but yeah, I think with that we can move on to chapter 19, Journey. Uh, so essentially, this is very similar to the earlier chapter when they're getting ready to head off to I think that was Neat Bay. Now it's heading off to Jump Bay for the kind of like remote marriage that Verity and Ketrican are going to have. It's also like the first few mentions of Ketrican. The
Woohoo!
Yeah, and I love that like the first time she gets mentioned, Shrew just like forgets her name. He's like Ketan, Ketlin, and like Verity is like Ketrican. Yeah, I
Mhm.
remember her. Like, and again, it's another
Even
sign.
I can remember that.
Yeah, it's another sign that like Verity deserves more credit.
Better
He,
info.
Mhm.
Mm.
um,
It's like a very minor note, but I love that there's a river that's just called Cold. Not even Cold River. It's just
Yeah.
Cold.
I can just see
It
like
reminds
all
me.
like Althea adding that to her rant. Like the six studies, they don't have glass in their windows. They have a river just named Cold. Like,
They don't even name their stuff well.
yeah.
Reminds me of the Princess Bride in the book Buttercup's horse's name. Horse.
It's just horse, yeah,
Yeah, and it's like
because she
because she's
doesn't have any
beautiful, but she's like
creativity.
kind of stupid and not creative at all. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
I think this is something that like all of us noted, which is um the stuff like loving that Fitz gets the line, "It's too late to apologize now. I've already forgiven you," from Patience, which we later find out is something that Chivalry said a lot. And like,
Hmm.
first of all, wonderful line in a vacuum, but I love this thing of like Fitz picking up these things from the people around him and like sort of becoming more like his parents just through osmosis.
Yeah, he adopts them.
hmm
Mm.
And also from the same conversation, I love the line from Patience. Boys, I decided, simply have a given amount of rudeness they must express. Just like matter of factly. The
It's their quota, they have to hit it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh,
It also gives him the earring in that
yeah.
conversation,
And the first time I read
Hmm.
this,
which
I thought she was talking about chivalry when she says that man has taste. Whatever else he lacks, he has taste. But they're like the present tense, reading it back, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, she obviously means Burrage and she must know that chivalry
Definitely
got the
Burroughs.
earring from Burrage.
I can never picture it well. Like, I feel like my image of this earring always changes. How do you two see the earring? Is it like a dangly earring? Is it just a very ornate stud?
For me, it's like a
Like,
I
dangle,
I
see
and
it
then
as
never
there's like
know
a
how to picture it.
silver. There's like kind of like a web of silver, and at the center, there's like a little blue stone. I think that's how I
I think
picture it.
it's dangly.
Yeah.
Because pictured it as dangly, but I'm like, why the fuck would Fitz wear like a dangly earring? But I can't see it as anything else. And then I always just kind of pictured it as like an actual net, like a very delicate, like silver net that is encompassing this stone, not that it's only wrapped around the outside or the back so you can see the stone from the front. Because I feel like that's how, like, I thought that's how it
I
was described.
picture
So I'm
it
like, okay.
like totally enclosed.
Hmm.
Yes.
So you can see the metal around the whole thing.
Yeah,
Well, I
because
always just
I
thought
think
of
Okay.
like spider web, slap the stone on, but totally enclosed also makes a lot more sense aesthetically.
um I think it's dangly because later on when Amber's wearing it, she has like wood around it to hide the fact that it's like slave freedom earring.
Mhm.
Mm,
And I feel like that'd be hard to do on just a stud.
yeah,
Easier.
that makes
A
sense.
dangly. Yeah.
And I think that like we can obviously talk about this more later, but I think the fact that like Burrage gives this earring to chivalry and then how much like weight he ascribes to it later on at the start of the next book, I think is like another indication of how strong the relationship between Burrage and Fitz, or not Burrage and Fitz, Burrage and chivalry was. Like it's obviously that this is
Yeah.
like not just some token gift. This is like essentially a representation of like this is my freedom. You gave me my life back. I'll follow you, kind of thing.
Yeah, this earring has a unique path. These stories, 'cause it's like Birch's grandmother's, and Birch's, Chivalry's, Fitz's, Fool's. It goes back to Fitz, and then it goes to Rich and Birch's son, I think, and Tawny Man. Like, does it end up with I can't remember his name now.
Swift?
Swift, yeah. Doesn't it end up with Swift? But like circles
remember.
I
back.
think it's
But that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, another notable thing in this chapter was the conversation with the fool, um, which we already discussed, like, the room earlier. But I love the quote from Fitz here where it's like, it made me wish there was a place as much me as that place is you, a place I would keep as secret. And I think that, like, that's probably the only thing that Fitz could have said that would have kind of like made the fool listen or like cool down the fool a bit, because it's just such a candid response. Because like, and it's just, yeah, because Fitz has always felt kind of out of place, even in his home of Buckkeep, and so having a place of his own that isn't like the stables, or like he has his room, but like it has that ugly tapestry of King Wisdom, and he doesn't like exactly have stuff to put there that
well, like
represents himself.
I feel like even his room isn't fully his own though, because so many people just come in, I think, without invitation. Like Shade comes in all the time, and there's the door that opens up to Shade. So I'm not sure there's anything that Fitz could have that would be secret in that room. The fool barges in all the time, but like that's him. And then like Lacey sometimes will come. So I think that Fitz really doesn't have any secret special place that's only for him, that he can create, that's like, this is me.
Hmm. And he kind of makes that
But I
when
think
he
he
has the
probably,
cottage later, but like,
that's what I was just about to
and
say.
then
He
he's forced to
definitely
burn it all
creates
down.
it.
Or like, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he just burns the. I think no. I think he just burns the papers. But like, he essentially just like abandons that home and leaves it for the winter, and it's like, oh, so painful.
I think he also has a little corner like in Withy Woods that he can kind of have and make really his own in
Mhm.
the last trilogy,
Gotcha, gotcha.
right? Because isn't that where that's where he lives
Yeah, he lives in Wigmore. Yeah,
after?
I just
That's
I
what I
don't
thought.
remember much about the last trilogy, as we've established several times so far.
I remember the most from that one because that one's the one that I read the most recent.
Mhm.
This one is like I'm like half remembering, half like, holy shit, like, did I know this before?
Yeah, I just
Just because 'cause it's
I
been
just reread this
so long since
over
I've
the
read these.
summer as well, so I'm like, I'm plugged into these books. I got it.
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I remember the last trilogy and Rain Wilds the best because I just read those this summer.
This is
Mhm.
a good counterbalance. Because again, I
Yeah.
literally didn't read any Rainwild, so I cannot remember it at all.
You definitely need to start reading soon so you can be ready for it, though.
I know we say this every
It's good.
episode, but then like, and then I just barely actually catch up with the reading for our actual recordings. So you know, um, oh yeah, another thing, it makes me sad, like how like direct the fool is. Like, I think it's really funny that like this is like, to express his displeasure, the fool is just like, yeah, you're gonna get poisoned. Here, take this. Like, use this when you get poisoned. Just like, whatever. I'm not gonna like, fuck being cryptic. Like, I'm over that at this point. And then that's how you know the fool's
Mhm.
displeased, when he's not like bantering or like trying to be
Yeah,
cryptic. And then I love how Fifth,
when
and
he's
then
just straight up with Fitz.
yeah, and then Fitz is like, phew, okay, he said something that's like a metaphor when he's like, remember, you must not measure your wheat with this bushel. He may not be using the same standard. It's like, okay, it's kind of cryptic. Maybe the fool's back to normal. Maybe he's chill. Like,
Right. Fitz is like, "I didn't really understand that, so I think he forgave me."
yeah.
And Fitz just goes off and like eats everything in the garden, Jampe,
Yes,
indiscriminately.
you dumbass.
Like,
Literally exactly what the fool told you not to do.